Welcome to today's webinar entitled Microgrid Control for a Smart, Sustainable Campus. My name is Billy Zadig, Manager of Special Programs for APA. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. The webinar recording will be posted to APA's webpage under the Continuous Learning tab later today. Professional continuing education credits are being offered for today's program. Those who indicated they wanted a certificate or registration and meet the requirements will receive certificates later this afternoon. All attendees are in listen-only mode. Please type your questions in the chat box and they will be answered in the order they are received. If we run out of time and we still have questions, responses will be sent directly to the person asking the question by one of our presenters. If you're just calling in, make sure to send an email to me at Billie, B-I-L-L-I-E, @apa.org, so I can send you a certificate if you would like one. The system only recognizes you if you log in. At this time, it's my pleasure to turn this over to Jim Waite, who will introduce our speakers today. Jim, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Billy. So my name is Jim Waite. I'm with the Grid Software, Siemens Grid Software in the US. And today we have a group of highly qualified speakers that we're glad to bring to you. We have a Mr. Phil Butners, Director of Estates and Development of Keele University in the UK. We also have a Mr. Carlos Vargas, Head of Grid Edge Sales, Siemens Grid Software in the US, and a Mr. Ian Lloyd, Head of Future Power Systems, the Siemens Grid Software in the UK. So we will be going through the speakers in order, and I will start by kicking off and going through some of the key topics that we'll be addressing and the key things we hope to cover in this webinar. So let's start with, thank you, Shilin, for bringing up this slide. Let's start with a description of some of the energy trends in higher education. So what are some of the trends that are ready in the higher education sphere? There is a great interest in coming up with greater resiliency in the area of electric grid power outages. So what is meant by resiliency? It has many definitions, but basically it means the ability of the energy supply system to bend without breaking. So if you are no longer able to get electricity from the grid in the event of extreme weather or in the event of forced outages in the grid, the university has an interest in maintaining operations of critical systems. So the university then should have the ability to use local resources to continue supply and continue operations of critical versus non-critical loads. And then at the end of the emergency, the ability to seamlessly restore to normal operations when the emergency has passed. The university also has a interest in lowering energy costs. In today's environment, the cost of energy vary widely. So this is due to the cost of fossil fuels and recent world events, price increases, embargoes, shortages, etc. And also within normal operations, utilities often have time of use rates. So the cost of electricity can vary with the time of day. Lower prices at certain times of the day when supply is abundant, and higher prices when there are times of shortages, right? So costs can be varied by shifting loads to times where cheaper power is available. And in some cases, the university may have excess power, and there should be the ability to sell that excess power back to the grid. A third trend is the ability to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. And this would be to meet the university's goals in the area of ESG. And finally, number 4 is the ability, the university has an interest in providing students with a living laboratory so that they can see and do research and conduct studies using live data. There is a strong interest in giving students access to a rich data set of energy data from campus facilities. And students can then use these data sets to as data for their student projects to do things like modeling, et cetera, et cetera. So next, can we move to the microgrid slide? So we'll be talking about microgrids, but just to level set and to make sure we're all talking about the same thing, I thought I'd spend a minute going over the definition of the microgrid from the US Department of Energy. So microgrid is defined as a group of interconnected loads and distributed energy resources with clearly defined electrical boundaries that can act as a single controllable entity with respect to the grid. A microgrid can connect to the grid and disconnect to the grid and operate in both grid-connected or islanded mode. Microgrid typically has local generation, it does local storage, it may have controllable loads, and it has this ability to island from the grid and to reconnect as a connected resource. Okay, next could be start with some of the points of view and some of the questions, right? So a university chancellor, for example, may start with the question of, where do I even start? Who can assist us with a feasibility study? So let's move on to the next slide, please. There are available several consulting firms who can help you with setting up your projects, etc. And there's one at Siemens Grid Software called Compass, which is a process that we can go through to assist a university in coming up with a plan. So the Compass analogy is, first you have to identify where are you now with respect to your goals of energy resiliency, etc. And where do you want to be? What are your ESG goals and how do you get there? What is your action plan? To do this, you will need to have a trusted partner who can help you with the needs analysis, can help you build a business case, can help you walk through and understand architectures and technology choices, and also help with the ability to review and find funding and grants. In the US, we've got the IIJA, which is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and we also have the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. And these are sources of funding and grants, and you will need a trusted partner to help you look at that, to see if any of these opportunities are available to you. The trusted partner can also help with the writing of a request for proposal or grant applications. And also, when decisions are made and the project is started, the trusted partner can help you with project execution and asset management. So let's move on to the next slide, please. Another point of view would be the campus facilities manager. The campus facility manager may ask, how do I get visibility on the performance of my assets to reduce energy costs? And let's move to the next slides. There are several things to be concerned about here. There are various ways to monitor and control assets. So monitoring may be done on different time frames. You can do it on a periodic basis from seconds to hours. You can also have systems that allow you to control assets, and then applications that allow you to optimize the performance of the assets with respect to different performance systems. You can optimize, say, with respect to CO2 emissions or with respect to cost. And there are also other applications that help with maintenance. There are a number of different systems that are available in the marketplace to help achieve these objectives. There are building management systems which manage, say, an individual building. There are microgrid management systems that manage a connected microgrid. There are demand response systems that can manage loads within an area or within a building. There are electric vehicle charging management systems that allow you to manage the charging of electric vehicles. And there are other distributed energy resource management systems that help you manage a wide range of distributed energy resources. So can we move on to the next question, please? Okay, so from another point of view, we have, say, a professor of sustainability or a sustainability manager. And So the sustainability manager, this persona would say have a interest in how do we reduce our CO2 emissions to achieve our decarbonization goals. And let's move on to the next question. So here, there are several steps to go through, a process to follow in this to achieve these goals. There are the steps of system design, system build, and system operations. So in the system design phase, there are several choices to be made with respect to selection of carbon-free energy resources. You know, there are available resources that use wind power, solar power. You can also have the option of getting renewable energy credits by entering into contracts with suppliers outside of the university and getting supply from that can be traced back to renewable generation, renewable sources. There are also choices to be made with respect to storage. We have electrical storage, battery energy storage systems. You can also have thermal storage systems, etc. We have the ability to flex loads, to flexibly change the load of a system, such as electric vehicle charging. We can use demand response to control air conditioning or heating, etc. And then there are all these choices to be made. So we absolutely have to go through a techno-economic analysis to select the options that are right for the particular situation. And so once the design is created, we'll have to select some of the control systems that we'll use, the monitoring and control systems and optimization systems. It could be a building management system or a campus-wide management system or a microgrid management system. And then within those systems, there are selections to be made with respect to optimization functions and operations functions. So these are some of the things that our universities are concerned about in this day and age. And I'd like now to transition to Mr. Phil Butners. Phil, can you help us? At Keele University, you have ambitious goals to divest from fossil fuels by a certain time. Could you please let us know a little bit more about your goals and how you plan to get there? So Phil, if you're next, can you please?
Will do, Jim. So yeah, so I'm Phil Butters. I have the fortunate opportunity to be a member of the executive team here at Keele University, and as my title suggests, responsible for the estate and the campus. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to do is take you through a journey which seems to have been a lifetime's work, but it starts to talk to some of the things that Jim has just outlined and some of the challenges and how we've gone about that, where we are now and what our next stages are going to be. Next slide, please. So for those of you who don't know Keele University, we're based in the UK. We're a very small university comparison. So, you know, we're, as the slide says, about 12,000 students. Manchester, for example, is about 40,000, Birmingham about 30,000, so a relatively small university. We were founded in 1949 as an experiment, and the idea was that we were, our founder, Lord Lindsay, who was from Oxford, saw the need for a broad-based education for the masses rather than the rich or the elite, and it had to be a broad-based education to cope with the uncertainties that were following from 2 world wars back in the 1930s and 1940s. So that's where we come from. A relatively small university, so about up to about 2015, we were around about 6,000 to 8,000 students. We've had a continued growth over the last 7 or 8 years, so we're now at 12,000 students, an ambition to get to around about 15,000 students over the next 3 years, and that's just purely responding to the higher education needs in the UK, but also the just basic economics of needing to continue to grow our income. We have 3 faculties: medicine, health sciences, natural sciences, humanities. We are one of 160 universities in the UK. We're one of 45 medical schools, and we're one of 8 veterinary schools in the UK. So although we're relatively small, we do actually have quite a presence in the UK. Next slide, please. I'm not going to dwell on this because I will come back to this in a moment, but basically in UK terms, Kiel is the equivalent of a small town. So I've talked about our student population. We actually have the largest single UK university campus in the UK at some 27 million square foot of space. We have over 350 buildings, 3,000 students. When the university was founded, all staff and students had to live on campus. So we have a legacy of campus houses. Fortunately, we don't all have to live on campus now, but there are still 200 staff that live on campus. We have about 2.8 million square feet of built development with further growth plans. So we have further sites that we can develop out. And I'll come back to that again in a moment. As I said, we have about 12 to 15,000 people on the campus every day, including 55 businesses in the science park with about 500 staff. And we do run our own utilities. Next slide, please. Because of our age, as you can see, a lot of our estate dates back to pre-1970s, with about 30% of our estate built in the 1940s and 1950s. So we have a lot of aging estate, which by definition is not really up to the necessary energy or carbon emission or sustainability efficiencies we'd expect to see today. And that really was one of the key drivers behind the journey we've been on. Next slide, please. So Jim talked about the priorities that universities set themselves and as part of as a business and also as part of an education program, and they're very similar to the ones that we identified. So our journey dates back to 2008, shortly after I joined Kiel University, and set about establishing what our energy strategy was going to be, with a focus around energy resilience, which Jim talked about. We are a rural campus. So keeping the heating and lighting running is absolutely critical for those 3,000 students that live on campus, or certainly those 12,000 students that study on campus. So energy resilience was a really key priority. And I'm still of the view that certainly in the Western world, we will, if we're not careful, get to the stage and we don't address the dependency on fossil fuels, we will start to see more regular power outages. Even before 2008, Kiel had set itself some ambitious targets around carbon reduction. And again, I'll come back to this, but we were working from our 1990 baseline, which was at the time was the standard, with objectives to deliver a 34% reduction in our carbon emissions by 2020 and 80% by 2050, which seemed a long way away back in 2008, but are getting very close, very close. And a few years ago, we as a university signed up to carbon neutrality by 2030. I will stress that consultation on that target was limited, but nonetheless, we're committed to it. And as part of that journey, we really saw the opportunity for Kiel to become a living laboratory, and I'll explain that as part of this journey. And of course, improving our energy efficiency and reducing our energy costs is a key priority. So those remain our 4 key priorities. I think what I would add to what Jim said is it's important that you have to recognise that at certain times of your cycle, whether that cycle be a week, a month or a year, those priorities may find themselves in conflict. So during the winter months, when PV, etc., is not performing efficiently, you might need to prioritise resilience of supply against carbon reduction. So you need to have a system that's able to adapt to prevailing needs. Next slide, please, if you would. The closing part of Jim's presentation talked very much about finding yourself partners, and Kiel is very clear that our energy strategy, our carbon reduction strategy, has very much been dependent upon having a good understanding of how we operate the campus, but having some trusted partners, and Siemens have been a trusted partner of ours now for several years and are really instrumental to the journey where we are, but also the idea that using the journey you've been on as an opportunity to educate students and stimulate research, I think is really important for members of the higher education, and that is a goal that I believe we've achieved. Next slide, please. So I talked a little bit about us being a small town and running our own infrastructure. So again, not going to go through this in detail, but you can hopefully get some understanding of what that means for a campus of our size. And as I say, we're comparatively a small university, but a large campus. So we have a large infrastructure that myself and my team are responsible for maintaining. And the concept of being a small town was a result of a journey into work one morning when I was listening to a debate on the radio, when they talked about a small town being approximately 12, 15,000 people with houses, businesses, etc. And that's exactly what Keele is. And that's what gave spark to Keele having the real opportunity to become a demonstrator in the area of sustainability, energy and energy distribution. And that's predicated on a belief that I have, and certainly colleagues have, and I know that colleagues on this call have, is that the solution to energy efficiency and decarbonising the energy network has to be based in marrying local generation to local demand and using the national network to support that and to move energy at different times through different vectors, etc. Hence the concept around the microgrid being a subsector of a national grid. Move on to the next slide, please. Hope this makes sense, but when we were on this journey, we started to look about how the campus was divided up. So I've talked about us having a small town. So we've got 3,000 student residences, 200 campus houses, shops, banks, nightclubs, bars, academic buildings, and a totally integrated science innovation park. We are the only single campus in the UK that has an academic, residential and integrated science park. And what we looked at was how those services and different demand profiles are distributed around the campus. They aren't clustered in nice, neat clusters. All these clusters have a variant of different types of accommodation, but they're dominated by particular types. So the yellow really shows where the main concentration of campus houses are. The blue show where the main concentration of our resident students live, and each of those halls has about 700-800 students living in it. The green areas show the centre or heart of our academic endeavour, teaching, research, and our commercial activity in terms of shops, bars, retail, banks, etc. Then the red is really where most of our science innovation park and our businesses are concentrated. Not solely, they are dotted around the campus, but that gives us an understanding of how those different demand profiles are distributed around the campus. Next slide, please. So in starting this journey, the concept was, and I do stress that these slides you've seen to date back to the period 2008 to 2015. So I deliberately haven't updated these because they show the vision that we were working to. So what we had the concept of was actually creating a number of different energy zones on the campus that embraced a cross-section of each of those different demand profiles, and each energy sector would have a dominance of a particular type of energy. So it could be solar, it could be PV, could be wind, could be ground source, etc. So the idea is you've got a different blend of energy dominating each of those sectors and supporting a zone on the campus that has a particular dominant profile. And the idea of that is to try and closely align the most efficient energy solution with the right demand. So demand, trying to match demand and supply. Next slide, please. So the challenges. So our objective was to try and get to at least 10 megawatt of on-site generation by 2021. And that would represent about 50% of our known electrical demand, and to deliver a saving through this vision of about 4,000 tonnes. So back in 1990, Keele University was about 13,000 tonnes emissions a year. So the idea was to get down by about 4,000 from the position at that time. The challenges, well, as a university in the UK, most of the student activity takes place between October and June. Our peak energy electrical demand is between midnight and 2 o'clock in the morning. And any solution had to be flexible to provide a benefit to all the campus users, whether it be students, residents, businesses, etc. And it had to be resilient and affordable, going back to the 4 objectives. So at this stage in the journey, we hadn't ruled any particular energy solution out, and we still haven't. But if we can move to the next slide, please. This chart I use just to demonstrate our journey. So this hasn't been updated since around about 2015-16, but I have tagged where we intend to be by 2023, which is, as I've said, where we are now, and where we need to be by 2050. So as I said, our carbon emissions in 1990 were calculated to be about 13,000 tonnes. That's scope 1 and 2. You can see that we stayed pretty level throughout about to the mid 2004, 2005, peaking at just above 14,000 tonnes. And that was about the time that we embarked on this journey. And you can see that there was a steady decline to around about 2012. And then we're projecting where we're going to be to 2020. That peak in the yellow ring was a decision taken by us as an executive team to open our study and library facilities 24/7. And the impact on our energy consumption and our carbon emissions was quite significant against that profile. And that's why I said at the beginning, you've got to have a strategy which can flex to decisions that you might be making on the journey you're on. Next slide, please. So the program was cost about 15 million. We funded some of that ourselves. We had support from British government and the EU, but the idea was to support the shift both as a university and to provide an educational platform for UK, Europe and the world in terms of how you would shift towards a low carbon economy. We are officially the largest smart energy network demonstrator or research facility in Europe. There were 3 key areas of the project. We already had a smart energy network, although it needed upgrading. So part of the project was to upgrade the smart energy network, and the technology we use was installed by Siemens over a period of 2 to 3 years. But we also put a whole additional or supplementary level of switching, monitoring, etc., and connectivity to enable us to actually play with the network and pilot, test and evaluate different technologies, different demand profiles. So artificially create different demand profiles to test and evaluate different supply scenarios. We wanted to install energy generation and distribution, and it had to support research and development. And I'm not talking about research for our students or research for our staff. This is turning the campus into a global facility that others can come and use. And it's already been used on a number of major projects in the UK, including injecting hydrogen into the gas network. We were the first site in the UK to test up to 20% hydrogen in the gas network because we have a private network. Next slide, please. So what does a smart energy network demonstrator do? As I say, it is a smart energy network. It is a demonstrator. What I mean by demonstrator is it's an R&D facility for us to use. I'm not going to go through all these in detail, but it enables us, our students, our academics, other universities, other businesses to actually come and model and evaluate different technologies. So when I installed our first PV panel at Kiel, to predict or evaluate its performance, the manufacturers basically asked us, how many degrees north of London are you? If you're X number of degrees, then reduce your performance factor by a factor of X. I always use the analogy of buying a new car, certainly a fossil fuel car, that manufacturers quote the miles per gallon you'll get from that vehicle. And I've yet to find anybody who's achieved the manufacturer's recommendation. And that's because technologies don't perform necessarily as they're designed when they get into a live environment. So Kiel can be used to evaluate technologies and actually prove their efficiency and their performance. I think that is critical if we're going to get the major global banks to invest seriously into new technologies. They need to understand and have some evidence about how they perform. The main priority is to be able to evaluate those technologies against different demand and supply and test different models. So if another university wanted to create a system, they could model it at Kiel before getting the investment and before implementing. Next slide, please. So what did we achieve? Well, we did achieve just shy of 8 megawatt of energy technology, which is 12,500 solar panels, 2 wind turbines. We did reduce our carbon footprint by 4,000. So since 1990, in 1990, our carbon emissions were 13,000 tonnes. The university has quadrupled in size since 1990, and our carbon emissions are now around about 9,000 tonnes, and we've still got a journey to go. So our next stage is to continue enhancing its developments moving forward. So next slide, please. So what we're now doing is using this platform with our partners, with Siemens and others, to actually demonstrate that there is a journey. Hopefully what we can bring to the party is, because we've been on this journey, which has been some 10, 15 years, we've seen some of the pitfalls, we've seen some of the hurdles. So hopefully we can help others fast track that solution. So that's our journey. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Phil. This is Jim again. So now I'd like to transition to Ian and Carlos. Kiel University won the Energy Efficiency Partnership of the Year in 2021 at the Energy Award for Innovative Partnership with Siemens. Carlos, could you please describe the value that Siemens can bring to university partnerships?
Thank you, Jim. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Carlos Vargas, the Grid Edge head in the United States. Regarding the question, Siemens has developed and as Phil explained to us, has increased in many different areas throughout the campuses with many different equipments. So today's has developed a system, smart system that can integrate different equipment, not only Siemens brand equipment, but any equipment outside there. There are a couple of business units that are working on developing APIs, open APIs, so we can integrate different assets, again, from different brands to make these campuses a better way, or in these campuses find a better way to integrate all that is in place. As you can see in this slide, starting from the bottom of the slide, so you can see all the assets and controls that are there, all the connectivity between these elements, the platforms that we use, or the APIs that I was referring into, and on the top is the applications. In this case, obviously, we're showing Siemens applications, but if you have another applications, we can very much integrate. I think to better understand this, why don't we let Ian to go on the demo and he can explain this part better. Ian, please.
Yeah, thank you, Carlos, and thank you, everyone else. Shannon, if you could just go back to the previous slide, please. It's really important in terms of the topical content that Jim was talking about in his overview, and Phil too in his run through about what goals that the university was set to achieve. So in that overarching statement, in terms of what defined a microgrid, we had the different capabilities and functions that exist within buildings, how different assets can all be coordinated together in a microgrid, how demand management can be coordinated, how electric vehicle chargers can be coordinated, and how cost and carbon then can be evaluated in terms of the demand on the network, the consumption of the power on the network, and to be able to define the source of the power on the network. So each of these things were critical for us in terms of being able to engineer a solution. But before I even start on that, I just wanted to be able to talk about me background. I have a whole background in utilities, which includes generation and distribution of electricity within the UK. And in recent years, I've moved into grid control and smart grid development and microgrid control. And I'm incredibly proud of the work that we've done and the entire team, both in the UK and globally, in terms of the work that we've done with customers just like Kiel. And Phil and I have a very close relationship now. We consider ourselves as friends in terms of some of the challenges that we face together, and how we've been able to really push the boundaries on what the Kiel goals were, and how we went about being able to achieve them from the knowledge that we previously gained from existing projects that have been completed within the UK and globally, and how they could be a relevant part of the solution that then went forward. And one of the key aspects also, like Jim spoke about, was the compass vision and the definition of the initiatives, and then the specification of the type of solution that was likely to be required. And after all the procurement processes were done and dusted, we were involved, of course, in the technical solution, the development of it, and then to be able to make sure that it was applicable for the university, that it was able to define the initiatives that they were set out to achieve, and then also the goals that they wanted to be able to to go way beyond, as Phil previously mentioned. So I'm just going to share my screen if you can give me the privileges, please. Okay, so here we go. Maybe the first time that any of you may have seen a visualization of a university or a campus facility in this digital space. So essentially, the tool that we use is DOP. It's Distributed Energy Optimizer platform. It's one of the solutions that plays a part in being able to manage power across the university estate at Keele University. And you can see on my screen here, it's an active animated capture of the university campus. It gives us an ability just to be able to look at it, just to be able to expand it, to be able to zoom into individual zones. And then as you see my mouse hovering over some of these locations, it gives us the opportunity just to be able to define the function that sits within different microgrid areas that are being well defined around about how they're set to operate within the university space themselves. If I click on the home button here, it starts to give us a little bit more information in terms of how power is being consumed across the university estate, from where it's being consumed, where are the largest areas of consumption in both power and in carbon, and then how we can attach ourselves in terms of being able to reach out to the application program interfaces, such as ones that are supported by the UK transmission sector or the UK government in here, in terms of sort of like energy pricing and carbon pricing. And this gives a very detailed intensity forecast based on carbon. And what we do is we utilize that information to be able to feed it in to the optimization platform and allow it then just to be able to make decisions based on either cost or carbon, just on how we can optimize power and power consumption throughout the university estate. So here's one of the particular views that we have on here. We can deep dive into particular sections of the university campus, so we can look at energy, how it's being consumed in each and all of the microgrid zones. We have different opportunities just to be able to provide us a much clearer understanding about load responsiveness, about how demands can be achieved, and also electric vehicle charging. There's a large uptake within the UK. I'm sure it's exactly the same in America as well, but there's already a fleet charging platform that's been developed and been installed on the Keele University estate. And these screens just give us an indication about how these charging zones are being utilized, whether they're active or not. That gives us an opportunity just to be able to investigate where usage is at its most and where it's at its least. It gives us an ability just to be able to modulate the amount of power that's being consumed on the network, and of course all that and in line with alarms and events and triggers. So here's some of the graphics that we have on the screen just to explain carbon responsiveness and demand responsiveness. Here's the carbon intensity tracker, as you see. So like there's moving across the university campus. It doesn't stay the same. No day is different. It's very much like a fingerprint. The intensity of carbon changes within the UK based on the weather, the climate, the amount of wind, the amount of solar, the amount of cloud coverage, the power of solar radiance, And all these things play a different part in terms of the amount of renewable generation that feeds into the UK grid and the amount of power that is consumed within this university campus. And that's on top of what they're able to generate themselves. So what we're able to do here, and here's a good example of it, is that as the trend of carbon intensity is actually reducing, we choose to be able to allow vehicles to charge, over a certain period of time. We choose to be able to either constrain them from not being able to charge at other zones. And exactly the same occurs in terms of like a building. So a building system, in terms of being able to manage building loads, to be able to understand about the forecast for an individual building or an individual metered asset. And on the right-hand side here, you can see a difference between forecasted and actual. Forecasted is orange, and actual is the red. And this gives us a little bit of insight in terms of the accuracy about the energy consumptions likely from an individual building. And what we do within this virtual power plant arrangement is we consider how individual metered assets are aggregated, how they scale up, and then what that looks like for us in terms of the amount of energy that is forecast to be consumed across an entire estate. But also gives us an ability just to be able to understand about how much flexibility is within each and every building. So we have multiple different zones where we can actually see this. And one of the important factors, of course, as Phil alluded to in his very detailed run through of the university campus, is how very proud we are in terms of being able to integrate this renewable electricity generation park that sits adjacent to the university estate, and to be able to seamlessly utilize the power that comes from it, to be able to deal with the grid constraints that are in line with being able to export some of that power back onto the grid, and how we can maximize the amount of energy that's being generated on site, to be able to store some of it both in thermal and in electrochemical storage facilities, and then be able to release that when the energy and electricity costs are significantly higher. Not many more things that I can actually demonstrate on this particular platform, except for the scale of its connectivity. So there's over 48 pages here of individual assets with meters that are integrated and connected. So over 1,100 different devices that are actually that play a part in terms of where we gather data from, how we harness that information, how we analyze it then, and how we optimize it from the back end of it. And the optimization characteristics we can define in terms of like these larger zones. So these are the individual microgrid zones that I mentioned to you previously. And we have different modes of operation in terms of whether it could be CO2 minimization. VPP mode is a cost optimization, or normal operation, which is a blend of both. And the blend of both is the normal one, but it gives us an opportunity just to be able to use this platform as a living laboratory, really a learning aid and a teaching aid, just to be able to advise about how different modes of operation can influence how different zones can be optimized, or how they can be used to be able to reduce costs. And then simply, of course, we utilize this data. We're able to look at a number of different zones here. We can click on a loaded report, and then we can see any different type of attributes, whether it's on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis, or a yearly basis. And it's very easy just to be able to understand about where energy was being consumed, how much carbon was being consumed on the university estate, how much carbon was being saved, and how much flexibility was being achieved. So that gives a very quick run through in terms of this type of platform and how it operates. We link it to very fast acting grid control software that allows us to be able to physically maintain the export and import limits that exist on the site, but this just gives you a very quick run through and hopefully a very useful overview in terms of how a university campus can be modelled in a digital twin and how valuable that could be for some of your other campuses as you're on the call here today. And Charlene, I'll just hand back to you.
Okay, guys, this is Jim again. I'm looking at the questions from the audience, and I see the first question here. The first question here is for Phil, and it's a question about do you guys have anything you can say about the investments that you made and any performance measures that you had, say, with respect to return on investment? Is there anything you can say in that area?
So certainly. So I think it isn't as straightforward as it may sound, because we were partly driven by the desire to create some learning and research facility. So the business case was not purely around return on investment, but you're absolutely right. Return on investment can be measured in several ways. I've talked about the objective of getting to net zero by 2030. Although that objective wasn't quite there when we started the journey, that the journey was to get to 80% reduction by 2050. So we've got the KPIs and measures around the investment we've made financially against that carbon reduction. And that's driven passionately by the fact that we generally believe and see evidence, certainly in the UK and in our international students, that they are very discerning around looking at universities that actually are taking the environmental sustainability seriously. So those are perhaps least measurable. It's about market position and actually making sure that you are acting as a responsible organisation. The investment that we measured, as I've said on the other slide, in sterling UK pounds was about 15 million. About 9 million of that was actually the physical infrastructure, which was building the infrastructure that Ian has just very neatly explained and described. The other 6 million was putting additional staff in to actually drive education, business engagement, etc., over a period of 5 to 10 years. So the capital investment was about 9-10 million. And what we've looked at really is we've tried to put a value on carbon emissions and a value on our energy. And the idea originally was to get an equivalent payback in about 10 years. I don't know if this answered the question, Jim, but that's how we did it.
No, I think that's a very nice answer. So what I heard you say was that in addition to having hard numbers with respect to what was spent on the project, we also have a benefit analysis, some of which is quantifiable and some of which is not. So not only do you look at the return on the investment, but also you look at the benefit it provides the students, the university, and the energy industry as a whole, right?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you, Phil. The second question is also for you, and this question has to do with the energy dashboard. Is the energy dashboard publicly available for everyone to have access to and to play with the data? And how do you address the flag corrective measures identified by analyzing the energy dashboard? Do you have a full-time person looking at the dashboard and monitoring it? Or what do you do with respect to that?
So was that directed to me, Jim? You broke up a little bit.
Sorry, yes, it was. If I can repeat a little bit. It was about the dashboard. Was it available to the public? Yeah. And the second part of it is, do you have a full-time person who monitors the dashboard and makes use of the data for academic studies, etc.?
Yeah, so we have a team of 3 people that run the Smart Energy Network stroke demonstrator. They have a split role in terms of they are partly there to run the estate as efficiently as possible. But the system has, in terms of doing that, what Siemens developed with us is it does have alarm systems, so they don't have to sit there and monitor the screens intently. There are various alarms and triggers that will fire. So so they partly do that. When you say it's open to the public, yes, it is, because it is a demonstrator. So we spend a lot of time hosting visitors that come through the campus to get a real hands-on feel of what we've done. And as part of that, again with Siemens, a very creative design of what we call the control room, which has the various screens so as we can go through live some of the things that Ian was demonstrating. And we also have a seminar stroke education room in there. So we don't have a person dedicated to send in the context of the research and education piece. The team multitask in terms of being part of the estates team, running the estate, and then sharing that knowledge and data. They work with our academic colleagues, postgraduate students, and staff to download data and use that to do various research projects, whether that be for the university students or other organisations. And we've just done some work, for example, with Birmingham Airport. So not a dedicated person or a dedicated team, but we use my estates team are multitasking in terms of the running the estate and providing an open research platform to public and businesses.
And can I just add onto the top of that, Phil?
Yes.
Jim, may I just add on to the top of that? Because what's critically important, of course, is that Keele University have invested heavily in this digitalised campus with the multifaceted control solutions that are there as well. So even though we have we have a wonderful control room, as Phil mentioned, and we have an ability just to be able to provide remote access.
Yes.
To the platform as well, so people can authorized people, of course, can dial in with the right security credentials, so they can look at, they can modulate, they can own and operate some parts of the system, they can respond to alarms, and we can actually action workforce crews to be accelerated in terms of being able to diagnose, so like where there are faults, where there are alerts, where there are alarms, and where there are issues. And on top of that, there's a whole raft of automation that we've built into the platform, and some of those were identified in the early vision and goals in terms of initiatives such as self-healing networks. So there's a raft of automation that has been trialed and tested and verified and then put in place, so that in a majority of instances the optimization just occurs without any human interaction whatsoever, and even the critical restoration of supplies, depending on where they occur, on the university campus, can also be resolved. So there's a massive amount of technology that's been implemented on the university estate, and each of those really helps to be able to serve those problems that talk about where you have resilience and where you have cost and then carbon reduction objectives.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Now there's another question here that either Ian or Phil can answer. The question is very specific. It says in the energy dashboard, can you see, do you have visibility, I guess, into the results of what the phrase here is, solar dips or clouds? Can you see that in the dashboard? So I guess it's is the data gathered at a periodicity that's fast enough to see a cloud pass over a solar field or solar panel and change the output? This is a very specific question. So whoever, Phil, Ian, whoever.
I'll give the short answer and say yes. Ian, do you want to elaborate?
Yeah, no, of course okay. I can. Yeah, so we have multiple different types of information that's being gathered across the university estate. On the dashboard that I demonstrated, it's a tool in terms of being able to understand about how much flexibility and how much power is being generated in each individual zone. We have the ability just to be able to shrink down on a second by second basis. So yes is the basic answer. We're able to see what sort of impact there is in terms of cloud coverage and daytime and nighttime and so like, and changes and so like in the wind environment, but also underneath the hood of this particular platform that I gave you a brief overview on, is that we have very concentrated microgrid control tools that are looking after network protection. so the protection of the electrical networks, and they work very, hand in hand with all forms of generation and energy storage, and also the grid constraint protection devices that we have in place. So this is very much sub-second monitoring. So just to be able to break down into multi-level granular aspects, there's a number of things that we can see, and we also measure solar irradiance across the university, so we can align that in terms of how much power was available from the sun, and what sort of impact that had on the solar generation.
Okay, there's another question here. Phil, you described that the university has, been built out over a period of time, and I imagine that you have systems of different ages and from different vendors. Could you talk a little bit, please, about the approach to interoperability between these various systems of different ages, different technologies, and different vendors? How did you approach it? What challenges did you find, and what were the results?
Because we were trying to create a live an open research and development process, one of the challenges that we faced in starting the journey and finding a partner to work with us was that recognition that it couldn't be a single manufacturer's platform. So the solution, as Ian talked to in his presentation, said it had to embrace all different technologies. And Kiel did have a number of building management systems and energy management systems on the campus, some older than others. We haven't gone through a strategy of replacing those out prematurely. Obviously, when we renew them, we will try and move to standardization, but that's been driven by just efficiencies of scale rather than the need to have a single platform, because this system will embrace every platform. The challenge we faced was, and I think Ian would concur with this, that it was trying to help organizations that were engaged with the campus, because obviously you have maintenance contracts with the various suppliers, whether it be boilers, whether it be substations, etc., etc. And they have this view that a lot of what they've got is protected by their IP. So the biggest challenge was actually getting around the table to understand what was commercially sensitive and needed to be protected, and what actually was just an open platform that was similar to everybody else's. So I think the biggest challenge is getting what would normally be perceived as competitors in the marketplace to actually embrace with the common goal and understand actually that there's not a great deal that is actually unique to any particular manufacturer. What's unique to the manufacturers is how they've gone about solving the solution, not the solution and not the problem. I don't know whether you'd agree with that, Ian.
Absolutely agree with it. 100%. The definition of being able to resolve infrastructure and industry, and campuses and any different type of built environment as it stands today, would be a ridiculous one, just to be able to, have the premise that every asset would need to be replaced by an individual supplier. So just being able to link up with technology from different periods of their development history, and then to be able to digitalize some of that. So some of it, of course, required some new assets, especially where very fast-acting energy flexibility and demand responsiveness is required. But in terms of being able to understand, from transparency and being able to modulate individual loads, then there could be very simplistic control instrumentation methods that are applied just to be able to add a degree of intelligence to very old network assets that could have been just replaced for the want of replacing them.
Okay, thank you, guys. I think we're now at the top of the hour, and we can close out the webinar.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for all of your time in putting this together. Greatly appreciate it. And to our attendees, as always, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. So until next time, be safe, stay healthy, and be kind to one another. Thank you so much. Bye-bye now.